Hello, everybody, and welcome to our webinar here at the Data Lab. It's a pleasure to have you all joining us this lunchtime, and thank you for taking the time out. So a little bit about what we're going to be discussing today. We're here to talk about AI and ethics, and I've got some really fantastic panelists joining me today on the call with us. So they'll all introduce themselves in a very quick second. Just a little bit of housekeeping from me. So just to look back, I'm Adam Turner. I'm one of the heads of innovation here at the Data Lab. We're an innovation centre dedicated to data science and AI innovation and adoption across Scotland and further afield. And it's a real pleasure to be bringing this conversation to the community today. Just a little bit more about what we do. So we're able to have these conversations regular. We have changing themes throughout our communities. You can use the QR code down on the bottom right hand corner to sign up for our virtual platform where you can continue this conversation. And we have our specific section set up for the team that we're going to be speaking to today as well around AI auditing. So feel free to join the community and feel free to come and join part of our community discussing AI auditing, and we would love to continue this conversation after we've had our session today. So first of all, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to open the door with regards to what we're actually here to talk about. So we're here to talk about responsible AI and the role of what participatory AI auditing is. And by the end of the session today, that's going to run for approximately an hour, we will have the audience members being able to understand a little bit more about what do we actually mean by AI auditing? What is it as a term? What is it as a practice? And why it's really vitally important to have non-AI experts in the room included within these processes. So this is what we'll be talking about. Now, I'm going to hand over, first of all, to Patrizia. So Patrizia, I'm going to let you come in very quickly, if that's okay. I'll let you introduce yourself, and then I know you've got some slides to share with our audience, and you're going to cover off kind of what is AI auditing at a high level.
Yes, hi, thank you so much. Yeah, my name is Patrizia Di Campi Samito, or Paddy for short, and I'm a research associate at the University of Glasgow, where I work in human-computer interaction, so looking at how people use computing systems. And within PHAWM, the project, I'm working on the stakeholder research, so the research where we get people in to talk about auditing with them. I'm just going to quickly share my screen so I can tell you a little bit about what is AI auditing. So this is a very high-level explanation here. So the very first thing is a definition, an ICO standard. So auditing is a systematic, independent, and documented process for obtaining audit evidence and evaluating it objectively to determine the extent to which the audit criteria are fulfilled. So what does this mean? This means there are audit criteria, and we have a systematic process with which we kind of try and decide if these audit criteria are met. And that is done by an auditor who does an audit on a specific system. So that is very high level what an audit overall is. So when we talk about audits of AI systems, we refer back to a paper that has been written by Behane and et al., where they talk about different stages that audits have. So the first stage that they have is impact discovery. Actually, they call it harms discovery, but we decided to go with the impact because harms is just negative, but positive impacts of a system might also be important to when we think about AI systems and what we want to audit for. So this stage basically includes thinking about these criteria that the audit should look out for, that we want to assess the system on. So for that, we have to think about what is the audit for? What is the audit? What is the AI system doing? Who is using the AI system? And what is the purpose of the AI system overall? Then we have to think about what kind of events could the AI system trigger and who could experience those. So these events could be positive or negative, right? Next, we think about standards identification. So basically, how can we decide when these criteria are met and how do we measure that? So it's good to have like an idea of the events, but if you can't really tell if these events occurred or don't occur, we can't really do an audit, can we? As a next step is the performance analysis. So this is the process of testing the AI system on these criteria we have identified. So it kind of depends on who does the audit, how much access do they have to the system, when are they doing the audit, when we think about the development lifecycle, right? And last but not least, we have audit communication and advocacy. So this involves like communicating the outcomes of the audit, not only to the people who potentially not only to the people who initiated the audit of the system, but also other kind of stakeholders who have like an interest in the system. So these are the 4 stages that we've also been looking at in our project so far. And I hope this gave you a little bit of a very quick overview of what AI auditing really means. Thank you.
Perfect, and thank you very much for that. So, one of the things that you'll be able to do for our audience watching this is that there's an ongoing conversation in the community currently around what AI auditing is, and certainly if any of our audience members would like to come and get in contact with Patrizia, I'm sure you'd be very happy to also continue this conversation around the work that's going on around participatory auditing and some of the work that we're doing here. So this is great. Mark, I'm gonna come to you next. So again, likewise, if you wouldn't mind just very briefly introducing yourself and the work that you're doing at the university, and then likewise, if you could talk a little bit about some of the great work that you're doing with us here in PHAWM, that would be amazing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Adam and Paddy. My name is Mark Huang, and I'm a senior lecturer and head of social urban policy at the University of Glasgow. So in this project, in this PHAWM project, Participatory Harm Auditing Methodologies and Workbenches, I'm the chair of engagement of our engagement committee and also one of the co-investigators. So I'm one of the few social sciences, non-computer science person bringing a participatory approach and thinking about more of a social justice angle in some of this work as well. So this project has been funded by the Responsible AI UK, which is part of the UK Research and Innovation funding body in the UK. We've received there was a big project that received more than £3 million, and it's for a 4-year project. We just started 1st of May. It always feels like just maybe last week that we started. We do have our website. Please do check us out. Follow us on LinkedIn. And as Adam mentioned, we do have the Data Lab online community where I think we hope this is just a starter of where the conversation around AI auditing. If you have questions, suggestions, or events that you're organizing, want to invite us over, we're really happy to be sort of informing those conversations. So please do add us. I'll just give you a quick overview of what the project is about and sort of what we're aiming to achieve. It involves 7 different academic institutions with 26 project partners, including use case partners, also research industry partners, and also engagement and dissemination partners. And we have a total team of 34 researchers and also 5 PhD students. And the main aim of our project really is thinking about in the AI auditing process, which sometimes also that's sort of predominated by people who have expertise in AI. We want to switch that power dynamics and really flipping that dynamics to think, how can we empower a more diverse set of people who don't necessarily have an AI expertise, but have expertise by lived experience in their own lives, knowing that how AI impacts their lives, but also perhaps expertise by learning that could be working in a sector for a long period of time as a practitioner, or they could be users of these platforms, and involving them and giving them the tools to audit the harms and fairness, particularly in our project focusing on 2 different types of AI. One is the predictive AI, where you're producing predictions based on past data, or generative AI like ChatGPT. We have 4 use cases that we focus on. The first one currently ongoing is the health use case, and we particularly partner with Public Health Scotland in this case, working on one of their risk scores model for hospital admission, for example. And Paddy has very much been leading all of that co-design workshops as well. Please feel free to ask questions about that. Then upcoming, the second use case is on media content, particularly in thinking about working with Estella, which is a sort of search engine company. And so that's how people retrieve information. Third use case, particularly around cultural heritage. We know that some members in the Data Lab communities are also very much strongly involved in this place. We're working with National Museum of Scotland, National Library Scotland, and other partners in thinking about this space, how generative AI is being used in cultural heritage, for example, in summarization and generation of metadata. And then fourth use case, which also in generative AI, is around collaborative content creation, particularly working with the Wikimedia Foundation, thinking about how sort of the collaborative content creation and writing and the tool of generative AI and use of that, and also thinking about different languages that's involved in creating some of those content. So kind of like over the 4 years, we've started now doing some co-design workshops that's really working together with these non-AI experts to coming up with things like what types of harms they want to be audited, how they want those to be measured, and then also to working with these people to designing wireframes and coming up with prototypes, ideas about how to develop them, and the computer scientists working together with social scientists and cultural heritage experts within the team to develop a workbench tool based on these co-design ideas. So we're developing those tools just now. We will be starting to do evaluation of these tools with a much wider range of stakeholders as well. And then in the end of the project, we're starting to think about already is sort of thinking about how we can provide and design training that would be sort of suitable for other organizations, like some of you who are represented here, or companies or public bodies who want to train non-AI experts to become auditors of AI, and also we will explore AI certification, particularly for public, industry, third sector organizations as well. So there are opportunities to sort of keep getting involved, but also hopefully we design tools and training and certification that would be useful for a much wider context as well. So there's a little QR code for our website. Please do follow that. And I guess that's me for now. Thank you.
Great, and thank you, Mark. So I think it's safe to say that there's lots of work ongoing. I know from within the project, we're obviously incredibly busy, but it's a very exciting time to be working in this space. But likewise, it's a really challenging time as well, also in this space. So life isn't without its challenges in these areas. So I guess that's a kind of nice lead into some of the work that you've been doing, Carrie, particularly around some of our activities around the policies and regulations activities. So I'm just wondering if you wouldn't mind just giving us a little bit of an explanation as your background and give us a little bit of a flavour of some of the work that's ongoing at the minute within the PHAWM project.
Yes, thank you, Adam. Yeah, so I'm Carrie Hadver-Monday. I'm a researcher and lawyer at King's College London, working on the PHAWM project. And my role in the project has been to look at regulation, policy making in this field, and also to speak with a variety of sort of policymakers, developers, experts in a series of interviews. So I'm trying to get a really good, thorough survey of the field as it is. Just to give an idea to those listening what how policy impacts on this process. Well, we heard from Patrizia that there's a sort of systematic process that's going into auditing, and of course this systematic process occurs within a kind of framework, right? So it's not happening in a vacuum. It's within a kind of policy context, and so you have to question, what kind of things do we need to incorporate into the audit, and what functions should the audit be playing given this kind of policy context, okay? So in reviewing global regulation, you do see that there is a focus on, to some extent, the kind of incorporation of many voices to review, so use of having people able to lend their voice to reviewing AI models and implementations of AI models. But of course, I'm sorry, you see that in kind of things like the Hiroshima policy framework, international declarations and things like that. And say if you look at the EU AI Act to look at something that is very specific, you can see that there's sort of risk-based framework, which feeds very well into the PHAWM. We heard about discussion of impact and harms, and that's how it kind of feeds in very well. But when you have to deal with things like policy and regulation, you realize that of course there's different approaches in different countries, but these tools often cross jurisdictional barriers, right? They don't restrict themselves to just one jurisdiction often. And so, you know, you have to bear that in mind. So we have to have something that can work in different, you know, scenarios. But also, and this is crucial, law changes. Okay, so you take a picture. If anyone recalls the Bletchley Declaration, that, you know, sort of Rishi Sunak, UK Prime Minister at the time, got everybody in to talk about AI safety. Everyone signed the sort of Bletchley Declaration, and then just over a year later, we have change of governments, the Paris Summit, and now, you know, the focus is more on the risk is getting left behind rather than risk, you know, than safety and things like that. And so we have to, you know, this informs our approach. It says, right, we need this tool to be helpful, to gather information that can, you know, inform policy. But we also need to be able to work with different frameworks. So this is the kind of context that they're working in, and hopefully, you know, provide a kind of standard that we can say, well, this is how participatory techniques can really inform policymaking and how we can assess models. That's
Yeah, definitely. And thank you very much, Kerry, for giving us that high level view of the world landscape, I guess, when it comes to policy and regulation. I think you summarized it very well around the world is changing at such an amazing pace. So it's definitely something that is a real challenge to keep on top of. So I know you're doing a fantastic job and working with partners to do some of that activity. So that's great. So we're just going to move very quickly into some areas where we're going to be discussing a few different areas. Now, just before we jump into that, we've obviously got quite a few different attendees on the call today, coming from many different parts of the economy. Now, any questions that you guys might have about the program or about the work that's going into the certain activities that have been mentioned around kind of 3 key highlighted areas of the project and those outcomes, please feel free to use the Q&A function to go ahead and ask any of those questions that you would like to ask. If I could ask, please, while you're doing that, if you have a specific question that you would like to be targeted at any of our panelists today, please do make sure that you highlight that in your question. That would be amazing. So what I'm probably going to do, Mark, is I'll come to you first, if that's okay. You're up first on this one. Looking at your background and bringing your research areas into the mix here, I'm obviously very keen to look at, particularly around marginalized communities and the work that we're doing within PHAWM, to make sure that we are as inclusive and open as possible as we can be. So I know that you're doing a fantastic job at working with our stakeholders, some of which were mentioned on that slide that you kindly presented. And I know that there's a lot of work going on here. So just wondering if you could give our audience a bit of a flavour as to some of the work that we're doing, particularly around the inclusivity elements of the project, if that's okay.
Yeah, of course, absolutely. And I think that's very much from the start of when we even put the project together, is very much driven by a very strong call from policies and regulations where they're seeing this gap about responsible AI, that for AI to be developed, designed, and used responsibly, we really need to have a better understanding of how it's creating impact on people, and particularly negative impact on marginalized communities. So it's sort of in the ethos of the design of the project and through the partners that we have, for example, Scottish AI Alliance, but also in our wider, broader network. I do a lot of work with community organizations in Glasgow and Birmingham, kind of across England and Scotland. So like how we bring those most marginalized voices, and also a lot of these voices historically excluded in technological innovation, in AI innovation, how we bring those to sort of flip that power dynamic, to bring their voice at the center of why we're doing this and what we're doing it in, and who we're building these tools for. So I think it's really important, and I would highlight, for example, Gina Neff's work, Abiba Berhani's work that Paddy mentioned earlier on. Both of these excellent scholars in the field are also on our advisory board. So they have been very much pushing the agenda and also drawing on their work and thinking about how we can actually think about kind of in terms of an ethical approach to make sure that when we include marginalized people, it's not just a tokenistic way or a checkbox Also check box where you're thinking, all right, we've done that and we've engaged with people. It's really important thing about how we engage with people fairly, compensating people for their time, for example, compensating for their travel and care costs, and also thinking about who is most likely to turn up and who is least likely to turn up, and finding a balance. There's never always a perfect solution, but we have to attend to those power dynamics and thinking about the workshops we design, the evaluations that we're going to do on our tools. I think we have been sort of like it's more limited in the sort of some of the co-design workshops, but I think in the evaluation stage, we really want to go broader and work with a much broader range of stakeholders as well through the advisory board and our partners network, really thinking about how we can make sure that marginalized voices are not just sort of like consulted at the end, or sometimes not consulted at all, not really thought about. It's just convenient who is sort of in the room or who can come, and that sort of overcome some of those barriers is really important.
Yeah, and I think you've tapped on something exactly there. We see in the world an awful lot of challenge around making sure that the voice is heard directly from the person who it's been coming from, right? Or who the voice is actually needing to speak. It's very important that we don't speak on behalf of certain individuals or groups or characteristics of individuals that are underrepresented in any shape or fashion. So I know there's a great deal of work, and I know we'll be leveraging a lot of the expertise from the researchers across the board here. But hopefully that just gives our audience a bit of a flavour to ensure that they are really clear that these voices are going to get heard. And I guess, Patrizia, this also taps into some of the work that you've been doing, particularly around some of our stakeholder work. So I wonder if I could ask a kind of follow-on question to some of that around what types of activities have you been doing with our stakeholders at the kind of front end with some of the research activities?
Yeah, sure. So far we've been looking at one of the health models that we're looking at in the health use case. That is SPARA, the Scottish Patients at Risk of Readmission and Admission to Hospital. And for that, we're running a workshop with potential patients, which could be anyone living in Scotland. So for that, we actually were really keen on getting a diverse group of potential patients in, and we're kind of like trying to kind of throw our net wide as we can, and we managed to get a group of 12 quite diverse people. It is harder to get to reach some communities than others. We were really trying hard to do that, but in the end we had a slightly skewed group towards like higher education probably, and overall tech savviness, though not familiarity with AI, for example. So that was really good that we did not have just people really keen on AI in those groups. So we're really trying to get as many voices into these workshops from which we want to kind of like extract views and attitudes towards AI, and what would a system that should allow them to also audit AI systems, what would that have to look like? What are they interested in having in these conversations? So we were really keen on doing that, and we want to obviously go on getting the most diverse people, like the most diverse group of people that we can into these workshops. But it is hard to recruit, and it is really hard to reach some of those communities, and then to kind of make sure that also that they feel like it's important to have their voices heard. I guess that is another thing, is that is really hard to kind of do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is also an area that, recognizing that AI is sometimes happening to people, and actually in order to be part of that conversation and to change the way that AI is done, we need to make sure that those voices are heard. Yes, Carrie.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I think that it's also a question of, that you actually, it's important to hear those voices as well, because the people contributing, they're kind of, they're not AI experts, but they're experts in what, in their own kind of field, right? They might not be considered experts by, sort of university experts, or they may well be. But the point is that by hearing diverse voices, we actually get better results as well. So it's not simply, it's certainly not supposed to be a kind of, just ticking the box. Far from it. It's actually very important core function to get those voices from diverse.
Very, very much so. Yeah, very, very much so. And I think that carries all the way through to the work that Mark was talking there around what are the outcomes from this project, right? We're going to have a series of workbenches, methodologies things that companies and agencies and individuals themselves can get hold of and get their hands on effectively, right? So I think being really mindful, and one of the great things that PHAWM is doing is building it with the stakeholders in mind. You know, they've been in the room from day one, they've been part of that conversation, and they're informing what is built. And that will also then help to build into these tools and kits. And actually, that's probably just answering. I'm just keeping an eye here on some of the Q&As that are coming in from our audience members today. So I've just noticed that this is a kind of question around what will this look like for people on the ground? You know, what is it? How is it going to manifest the outputs of this project? So and how will people get hold of them? So this hopefully goes some way towards answering that question around what are the tangible things that people will be able to get hold of, which is very vitally important. Some of the work that we've done as well in here, so I just wanted to flag, so obviously the Data Lab is very well known in this space. We've done an awful lot around having these conversations. We've been very fortunate over the years to have partnerships with authors and esteemed individuals such as Cathy O'Neill, who've obviously done lots of publications around the implications of what can be done and the weaponization and the harms that can be done from data at its core. So I'm just wondering as well here if there's a role around looking at the core data sets itself. And Patricia, I know you've been looking at some of the kind of work that's going on within these activities and data. So I'm just wondering if you could kind of touch on the work that's going on around assessing the vulnerabilities that might already exist in some of this data behind the scenes.
Mm. So one of the things here to think about the data is that we might not have the data for all of the models that we want to audit. We very likely do not have that for SPARA specifically. Obviously, we cannot get patient data or anything like that. So we are working with Public Health Scotland, who built SPARA, and we can go back to them with some questions, but we cannot really touch it ourselves, and we cannot really play with it ourselves. So we have to in this specific one, we have to rely on what have they already done. I mean, there's a dashboard out when you can look at some of the numbers for that. But that is one of the things we always have to also keep in mind when building, like thinking about building these workbenches in the end. So who is going to set up these audits, and what kind of access to the data will we actually have for that? So we're thinking very much about the different kinds of audits we could do. What do we need from the people kind of like initiating the audits to do it properly, and with the data. Yeah, so for example, so very clear example. So we were asking our participants in one of the workshops, what do you see as harms or like negative events that could come out of using SPARA? And they came up with some things, and we were asking them, how would you try and evaluate that? And the thing is that they wanted some data that is not even kind of collected for SPARA. So one of the things is also that if we have all these voices heard and everybody comes up with ideas, there might be something that the people building those systems could also learn from them, and could get new insights into what is actually important to the people on which those systems are used or who are using those systems. So while we might not have all the data, we kind of have to deal with that and see how can we do the audits without all this data. But it also is something where it really could open up the minds of people building the system when it comes to data, and what data might be actually important and interesting for people.
I think that is a really wonderful reflection, actually, and very well succinctly put. So I think it's amazing, isn't it? You know, what you're talking about there is genuinely real life. You know, we're not going to get everything perfect all the time, and I think being able to go back and actually inform participants and also members of our community that we're working with and partners around how they can design better systems also in the future is a nice thing that we're also being able to complement here, which is great. So that's fantastic. Some of the work that we're doing here, particularly around the international element, and Carrie, I'm probably going to come to you on this one, but please, Mark, Patricia, feel free to jump in on any of this. There's obviously a lot of conversations around diversification of AI policy, and actually how far we go with AI policy, and it's changing so quickly. Just wondering, we're obviously looking at things like the International Association for Algorithmic Auditors that are existing, and there are efforts underway around how we can oblige by these standards, so to speak, and manage them. So just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about the work that we're doing with these international standards, if that's okay.
Yeah, I think that you're right. There is a kind of diversification in the approaches to AI, but I think that ultimately we are getting a I mean, it's kind of inevitable to a certain extent, because artificial intelligence and sort of acceptance of it is quite contextual. It's very much depends on the context in which it's been applied, the particular sector at times. So it's, if you see what Ireland has recently brought out, they're part of the EU. They are working under the EU AI Act, but they have this kind of they're intending to create a kind of distributed approach, so that instead of having one central regulator that just looks at AI, they're looking at using existing regulators but applying the kind of concepts underlaying it. And so I think that how we're working with international kind of standards, well, it's informed really a lot of the discussion internationally about well, I think number one is being able to have these conversations. We're discussing it with policymakers and sort of people in the field at the moment while we're developing PHAWM. So that's feeding directly into what we're doing. It's quite hard to get a kind of broad statement that is useful because of the sort of contextual, the cultural context that goes into this. But nevertheless, there's some underlying things, like, as I said before, this need to have various voices heard, which really goes to the core of what PHAWM is doing. And so, we have, it's a kind of porous scenario where we're taking in all this information, but it's not necessarily formulaic. In fact, there's a problem with it if it's too formulaic, because it becomes too rigid.
Completely. Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, I think that the fragmentation, particularly around compliance of policy makers and showing that people are compliant, so to speak, right? I can see in the Q&A today that we've got a question around how do we encourage people to not just be compliant, but actually move to a position where they're actually willingly doing this and actually electively going further sometimes than the compliance elements are advising people to go to. So I think people almost sometimes see the rules and regulations as we have to do this. This is the minimum threshold that we have to cross. But I guess the good question is around how we also help through PHAWM and the products that we create to encourage a good practice around how you should do some of this stuff. So hopefully that's also another good thing that we're seeing here. Now looking here particularly as well. So I was just looking in some of our Q&A, so it might be useful for us to just pause and come to some of our panel questions that we've got coming in from our audience. So one of the questions that's come in here is around, do the panel have any insights on the incentives for industry to go further? So I guess it's kind of building on what I've just said. Are there any incentives that companies can look at around how they can comply, but also go further in this space of ethical, responsible AI auditing? I don't know which one of you guys would like to take that one on.
I mean, I'm happy to initiate, and then if somebody else wants to
no problem.
I think that it's a better system if it's dealt with in this way. Problems will come to the fore much earlier. You won't have, I mean, if you're looking at a purely commercial sort of lens, then there's a reputational damage associated with some of the sort of breaches, and well, even if they're not legal breaches, there's a reputational damage element. And in a sort of positive sense, we take away that kind of negative attitude, public confidence, and having, being kind of a beacon for this inclusive approach to, dealing with the potential for AI harms, the potential for impacts from AI is really, really useful. And then finally, I'd just say, that it's something that Patrizia was saying, which I thought was, core really was this discussion of, okay, well, we did call it harms, but now we're talking about impacts, okay, because we want to collect the positive aspects. And that's something that's entirely, well, not, I wouldn't say entirely, but it's mostly missing from the regulatory kind of angle, right? But actually in practicality, this is something that we constantly balance is, you know, what if you're talking about health, for example, you know, if something is life-saving, then you accept a certain amount of different, you know, some levels of risk. These are factors that often go into consideration. So that would be my kind of answer to that.
I would like to really add to that, because that is also something we saw in the workshops. People were very positive when we were asking what kind of impact could Sparrow have. There were more positive impacts than negatives, really. We were then trying to focus on the negatives later on, because we were like, how could we measure these? But we really had to go back and be like, okay, now think about which ones of these are positive, which ones are negative. And there was a fairly positive attitude towards it overall, yeah.
I think it's important to also, like, I think the reality is that it's always going to be this dilemma between the convenience, the innovativeness, and potentially actually improving services, particularly in the health case, but also, for example, in sort of making for cultural heritage sector, for example, reducing some of the burden and administrative burden in creating metadata, for example. But then I think people are also really interested in thinking about the pros and cons of this. So the potential of stereotypes, misinformation, biases, prejudices being sort of embedded in some of these AI models and tools. And that's something I think where PHAWM comes in to help to de-risk of thinking of the overwhelmingness of this as a huge thing for any companies of any size, even the largest ones, to start to think about. And I think here's where maybe universities and more partnerships with university is helpful, is that we can, as academics, we help to develop and think about those thinking and bringing all these different existing tools, existing frameworks, analyzing those, which Carrie and Gefion and our team have done, and then thinking about what tools specifically we can build that would actually enable companies and public bodies and even third sectors to actually do this in practice, implement some of those. Might not be all of that, but actually a tool that enable to at least to see, and for people who are not AI experts, to visualize what types of harms and biases might be coming up, and therefore what mitigation might be required, as a sort of middle step that really bridge to understand, rather than at the moment we have a kind of Wild West type of situation where the regulation is slow. People are just like, I'm just going to try and throw this AI to it and see what happens. And I think there's increasing evidence that's showing now that actually that creates more stress for workers on the front line, trying to make sense of what the especially generative AI throws at them, or not understanding how the predictive AI derives at this outcome that is not explainable, is not transparent. But the tool that we develop, and I should also specify, our aim is to make these tools as publicly available as possible, so that companies, governments, public bodies, and as well as communities in the third sector themselves, which increasingly really, and activists and digital activist organizations that really want to sort of unpack some of these black box, gray box, white box type of tools, and actually put those tools into the hands of people and organizations. And then if you're thinking about before thinking about whether I should use AI from this context, we always ask, is AI actually needed in this context? But then you can run the AI model or using this tool that would help you to identify what harms and biases might be coming up, and the methodology would then help provide a process how you can involve more people and diverse voices in that process.
That was really eloquently put, guys. I liked that. That was good. And yeah, I mean, I think it's really good, and I think the slide that Mark, you brought up a little bit earlier about some of the great work that's going on with the partnerships, and if you even look at who the constituent members of PHAWM are, right, you know, and who our broader audiences are, I think the great thing is that you've got academics at the table who are really specialists in their field, but really one of the great things that we are looking for at the end of this project is for practical implication and practical application of the tools and the great work that we're doing. So it's that translation from theoretical activity into, we are going to give people the things in their hands that they can do stuff with, that they can do exactly as you just said, Mark. have that conversation, balance the prioritization of innovating and not stopping that innovation from happening, but doing it in an ethical and inclusive way, and giving them the tools and means and know-how as to how they can proceed and use this. So that's hopefully the grand ambition that we're looking at. There's a question coming in. Obviously, this is a very popular topic at this moment in time. It's something that Scotland is really leading on around some of this conversation around participatory and the ability to be able to hold AI to account. There's lots of worldviews around, just throw it at any challenge and forget about the harms. But I think we're trying to find a balance somewhere here around making sure we don't stop that innovation whilst also managing and anticipating harms. But also looking at the positive side here, right? There's lots of great things that can come from it. And I really like the fact that we are also emphasizing this is a great thing, that we can also look for opportunities here. This is a great thing, this is something that we're looking at. But likewise, there is a very popular and a populated ecosystem of entities in the United Kingdom doing quite a lot of these conversations. Now, I don't know, Mark, obviously specifically on the stakeholder side of conversations here, if you could just give people a bit of a flavour as to how our programme is connecting in with some of the other UK programmes that are in the United Kingdom, people like Turing, etc., how we're navigating and correlating and working together.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's really important. I think the timeliness of this project is important, especially in January with the UK government just announcing the AI Opportunities Action Plan. And there's a lot of focus on sort of putting AI in health, into improving public services. But in fact, a lot of kind of researchers and scholarships, including the people in Alan Turing Institute and also at the Ada Lovelace Institute, for example, who are doing sort of voicing concerns that the kind of issues around safety, around ethical, inclusive, trustworthiness, which is in the Scottish AI strategy, not really being reflected in that vision, or somewhat being neglected and forgotten about. And that's important, I think, for projects like ours to bring those conversations at the front and creating incentives for AI that actually could be created more in an ethical, trustworthy way, instead of just that with the growing public concerns and mistrust that actually these AIs are just probably not creating outcomes and outputs that actually is ethical or inclusive. And so that's important to think about that. The organizations that we've been linking with, so we are part of the network of programs that's funded by the Responsible AI UK. So they have a very large program that also fund other initiatives within the UK, for example, Public Voices in AI, which is led by University of Sheffield, and the ESRC Digital Good Network that we have a very strong sort of overlap with. And Ada Lovelace Institute, who do a lot of work. They are also looking into AI auditing. They are part of our partners as well, and other regulatory bodies like the Information Commissioner Office. ICO is also part of a partner and advisory board. And we're also actually connected to the NIST, which is the US equivalent of, I think, of some of the UK Department of Innovation, Science and Technology, which are also starting conversations with. We just had conversations with Audit Scotland last week as well, that they are expecting or anticipating to be thinking about the AI space. So we've been making connections there. So I think there are sort of lots of overlaps and synergies with these existing programs. And what's just nice to see is that actually, because this topic is so vast, there's actually so much work that needs done, even though there's not, and that's important, because then each of these different projects almost deep diving into specific issues, but then we can sort of all add it together as greater than the sum. I can't remember what, I can't recall that phrase specific, but you know exactly what I mean. 1 plus 1 is greater than 2 type of initiative. It's really important. And I think there's something about the UK climate within the political landscape, unlike some other parts of the world, there is actually kind of this space to have this conversation, healthy conversation about the balance between the opportunities and risk, and of course thinking about diversity and inclusion in these topics. It's extremely important and can put UK really in the sort of forefront of global initiatives. That I think there's some catching up to do, and sort of more joined up thinking, how policymakers, academia, industries, third sector organizations all really bringing the knowledge together.
And I think that word that you use there, balance, is very key here. Because different parts of the world see it as a kind of seesaw measurement, and different parts weigh certain things in different areas. And I think the UK is very much trying to find that balance. Obviously, Carrie, you'll have been looking into this as well. Around Mark touched on it a little bit about some of the AI opportunities plan, right? So this has obviously just been launched from the UK government, and around, you've got a vision of the future and what it's trying to achieve, and then you've got the regulation. So I'm just wondering if there's any challenges around communicating or bridging that gap between what the vision is and what the regulations are, and maybe if there's anything that PHAWM is doing tangibly in that space that you think is worthwhile our audience knowing about today, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's it was the change from when the AI opportunities plan came out, that we had a kind of viewpoint of how the UK legislation was going to go prior to that, and then now we have a sort of shift. The focus now is on facilitating innovation. The focus is on accepting greater levels of risk potentially, rather than simply saying, right, well, we need to restrict risk. I think if we're looking specifically at that context, PHAWM still has a very important part to play to judge what risks are reasonable to take and which are not. So it doesn't really actually change that approach too much. What do you say about sort of misalignment maybe between expectations for regulation and what regulation there is? I think in a sense that's quite natural, because these are developing technologies. It's hasty law is going to be bad law, in the sense if law is brought out and regulations are brought out very quickly to try and act in this, then that can be problematic as well. But I say, when you look at what the EU has done, they have a framework and they have kind of core principles, but there's going to be a huge amount in the next 18 months. There's going to be a huge amount of further guidelines, further explanations about what the sort of top level requirements are for the EU AI Act. And so ultimately you're going to get more detailed sectorial legislation, most likely, or regulation, or however it comes out, whether it's hard law or if it's soft law. These things are going to come out. Where PHAWM stands in that is the fact that it is logging and understanding risks as they occur, being responsive to how people, what is actually happening on the ground, and is actually a fantastic tool to assist policymakers in that sense, because it actually flag up problems as they come about. Whereas, if you're trying to create an auditing tool that is top down, that goes, okay, well, what's the law? And then, okay, well, what's the regulation here? And what's it? You're not actually responding to what's really happening. And of course, law is always going to be behind the curve. So this is actually, you might find that these kinds of projects, that's something that PHAWM is trying to do, is actually almost more of a standard setter as well. It kind of works to help create a kind of standardized approach to new technologies as they come about in a much more responsive way.
Definitely, and I had the benefit of being sharing some of this insight, as I know we all have, with some of our counterparts, and that's both national, local to us in the EU, but also further afield. We've got some of the great work that's been undertaken in Australia, and they have a very different stance to some of the stuff that we're doing here. And you find different parts of the world taking different stances on this thing, and I think this is really great that we are able to stand up and to say we are starting to grapple with that kind of nettily form, and to come up with some ways of actually balancing these conversations in a nice way, and to have that in an open and a transparent way as well, which I think is very important around some of this stuff. We're just coming into the kind of final 10 minutes of our time with you guys. I can't believe how quick time flies when you're all having fun, which is great. I'm just going to come to each of you individually, if this is okay, and just to give a kind of quick reflection on some of the work that we're going to be doing, and some of the kind of exciting things that you're excited about in the PHAWM project. So I'll come to you first, Mark, because you're smiling at me the most. So you can go first on that one, if that's okay.
Yeah. So I'm most excited about filling the gap that I think with so many guidance, code of practice developing across internationally, I think there's a really important and urgent gap that to enable industries, governments, and community understand actually what needs to be done. Like how can we do some of this in practice? So I think into 2025 that our project is going to start be able to at least showcase and demo kind of proof of concept prototype of a tool that industries and organizations can use to help audit some of these harms. And I'm really excited to see how that tool being created reflects from the kind of day one of the workshops that we can engage with people who are not experts, and to see and compare that, how we have sort of gone from the discussion to create a tool that really reflects what people say. And I think that was a really rewarding moment, that we didn't just sort of sit around the table and imagine what people need and want, but actually really valuing the expertise that people bring from their lives, from their sectors, from the decades of practice, understanding how they impact their lives, to be able to see that sort of like their knowledge and their values driving what this future of AI could look like. And I think that's really exciting to see.
And I can see both Carrie and Patrizia smiling away here, because I know that that is exactly something that is shared by both of them, no doubt. So, Patrizia, I don't know if you've got anything additional to add to anything that Max just said.
Yeah, so on top of that, I'm really, really curious to see, because so far we've mostly engaged with like one group of stakeholders, these potential patients, but we are currently reaching out to GPs to get their views on the same model, and we're preparing to look at another model in the health sector. And I'm really, really curious to see what are what thoughts do they share, what attitudes do they share, but where are the differences as well. So that is also one of the things I think in this project is really exciting. We have all these different use cases, we have different stakeholders in the different models, so a lot of views coming in and coming together there, and I'm really, really excited about seeing where that leads us. Like how common are some thoughts maybe about the things, how different are the others. So really curious to see what comes in there. So that is what I'm looking forward to the most, I think.
Fantastic. And finally, Carrie, I'll come to you. Any exciting things that you're looking forward to in the program?
Yeah, well, apart from what's already been said, I mean, for me as a lawyer, it's it's very exciting to think, what to be able to look at something that can cross international boundaries or national boundaries, and think, okay, like having access to all the knowledge that people are, as we said, there's a lot of partners, a lot of people globally contributing to this, a lot of research projects collaborating together, and to see how the sort of combined knowledge, we can come up with solutions that actually are not just sort of as a lawyer think like rules and things like that, but no, but actually something that can be move these discussions something positive to something that we can kind of achieve, sort of manage this sort of scary scenario that some people see, but also do it in a responsible way and maximize the benefit for those involved.
Absolutely. And I think, again, it kind of comes back to that balance. And I think this is fantastic work that's ongoing across the areas. Now, just as we start to wrap up the activity, we haven't managed to get to everybody's questions today in the Q&A. We could talk forever about this topic, all of us. So we're very pleased that there is such interest. One of the things that we'd be keen to do is to signpost people also into the Data Lab community, as Mark said up in the very beginning of the project. We're all active members in that community, and we're very willing to answer specific questions about anything that you've heard today. And likewise, if you'd like to know more about the program or how you can get involved, there's a couple of key areas that we would signpost you to. First of all is the Data Lab community. You can sign up to our mailing list, and you can select how you wish to be involved. If you are sat on this call today and you are a prospective partner of ours and you would like to come and learn a bit more about how you can partner with us, I'm going to hospital pass that one to Mark, but anybody who can get in touch, and please reach out to him, and he can advise how you can get involved and partner with the program. And likewise, if there are any areas that you think you would like us to be connecting into as a program, we're all ears. We would like to have this level of conversation as well. There will be opportunities throughout the year where we hopefully will come back, give you a little bit of an update of the types of things that we're doing throughout the year. So you'll have regular kind of status updates from us, as well as also the newsletter and activities on the ground. And we are hopeful that we'll be able to do a series of events where you'll be able to join us and learn a little bit more and come and meet us in person, which is always nice. Just as I start to wrap up here, I just want to thank all of our wonderful panelists here today. I have the benefit of working with you as a collaborator, but it's a real pleasure to also have you come and tell the story of what we're doing with PHAWM and how your research is making an impact here. So thank you from me. Thank you to our audience members for joining and coming along and asking some really thought-provoking questions. The community doesn't exist and thrive without you, so we really thank you very much for joining us today. We have, for the remainder of March, we've got a couple of other activities lined up. One also being around AI ethics and compliance with the LEGO group, and that's on the 25th of March. So that's really exciting. Please come along, again, free of charge. And as we transition into April, our monthly theme is changing, and we're flipping over to looking at around data science, AI applications, and innovation in the life sciences sector. So quite a change, and we're really keen to also continue that conversation there. A very final note from me is that we have our annual conference, which is coming up around DataFest, and we would encourage people to sign up for that. That's in May. And you can go onto the Data Lab website to get access to all of that. So there was a lot of information, a lot of things covered in this session. But again, as I say, if people would like to continue this level of conversation, we would very much welcome that. So I guess all that's left to do is say goodbye, and thank you very much for joining us today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
you.
Goodbye, guys. Bye.